Kentucky holds more than just rolling hills and bluegrass. Beneath its forests and caves lie ancient mysteries. From cryptic petroglyphs and massive burial mounds to lost tribes and unexplained stone carvings, the Bluegrass State is home to stories that challenge what we think we know about America's ancient past. Red River Gorge Petroglyphs. There's something haunting about markings in stone. Unlike paper, wood, or even bone, they don't fade with time or disappear in a fire. They stay. Long after the people who made them are gone, their carvings remain, chiseled into the cliffs, caves, and boulders, a permanent whisper from the past. In Kentucky's Red River Gorge, these stone messages still speak. The problem is no one really knows what they're saying. Most people today know Red River Gorge as a place to hike, climb, and camp. It's beautiful in that quiet, ancient way, towering sandstone cliffs, tangled forests, natural rock arches. If you're lucky enough to be there in the early morning, the fog hangs low and the trees drip dew like the forest is still half asleep. But hiding in all that beauty are strange carvings that most visitors never notice. They're not marked on trail maps. You won't find a plaque or a warning sign pointing you toward them. Sometimes, you stumble on them by accident, etched into a flat rock wall, or hidden beneath a weathered overhang. These spots used to be dry shelters, safe places where ancient people probably camped, cooked, or took cover during storms. And somewhere along the line, someone decided to leave something behind, something permanent. The petroglyphs carved into the gorge aren't like anything you'd see in a museum. There's no neat caption or translation underneath, just shapes, arrows, spirals, stick figures, hands, a few animals, sometimes symbols that look like stars, suns, or even celestial patterns. But there's no clear storyline, and no two sets are exactly the same. Some are barely visible, worn down by time. Others are crisp and sharp, like they were carved with real intention. It's obvious they weren't all made at once. These symbols came in layers, each group possibly separated by centuries. Experts believe some of the oldest carvings could be 2,000 years old or more, most likely created by people from the Adena or Hopewell cultures, who lived in this part of Kentucky around that time. Later petroglyphs may have been added by woodland or Mississippian people, and there's even talk that some carvings could have been made by colonial settlers who saw the older symbols and tried to copy them without understanding what they meant. But even if we know who might have made them, we're still in the dark about why. You can hike for hours in the gorge without seeing a single carving. Then, out of nowhere, you'll find a small patch of symbols on a vertical wall. No ruins, no fire pits, no burial mounds, just a quiet stretch of forest and a slab of stone that someone, 1,000 years ago, decided was worth marking forever. One of the better-known sites is near Sky Bridge. But again, it's not something you'll see marked off with ropes or signs. You have to know exactly where to look, and even when you're standing right in front of it, the carving can disappear unless the sun hits the rock just right. It's easy to walk right past them. Many people do. Some symbols may already be lost for good, erased by moss, washed away by rain, or buried under careless graffiti. That's part of what makes finding one feel so strange. You're staring at a human-made message, and it's like looking into a foggy mirror. You know there's something there, but you can't quite make it out. So what do the symbols mean? There are plenty of theories. The most accepted idea is that they were spiritual or ceremonial, a kind of visual language used to tell stories, mark events, or record visions seen during rituals. Spirals, in particular, are often thought to represent the sun or time itself. Maybe they tracked the seasons. Maybe they pointed toward something sacred. Another theory says they were territorial signs, a way of saying this land belongs to us to other groups who might pass through, like an ancient version of a fence post or a boundary marker. But then there's the more out there theory, the one that pops up on late-night forums and fringe archaeology books. Some researchers and amateur historians have noticed that a few carvings in the gorge look eerily similar to symbols found across the ocean. Things like Bronze Age European glyphs, even ancient Phoenician script. Does that mean people from the old world made it all the way to Kentucky before Columbus? Honestly, probably not. There's no solid proof, but the resemblance is strange enough that it gets people talking, and if you're into the paranormal, the gorge has plenty of stories to feed your curiosity. People talk about flickering lights deep in the woods where no one should be, strange voices or footsteps echoing from empty caves. Some even speak of the Watchers, shadowy figures seen near petroglyph sites, as if someone or something is still keeping an eye on the carvings. There's one story from a group of campers who swore they found freshly carved symbols on a rock face, symbols they were sure hadn't been there the night before. Maybe it was a prank, Maybe they imagined it, or maybe some mysteries just don't like to be solved. Sadly, many of these petroglyphs are in danger. They're exposed to the elements, rain, frost, plant roots growing through cracks. Some have already been damaged by people tracing over them, or worse, tagging them with spray paint. Most aren't protected by any law or organization. They just sit out there, aging quietly, one storm at a time. A few years ago, a team from the University of Kentucky set out to digitally record as many petroglyphs as they could. They used 3D scanning and photogrammetry to capture every line and curve. It's a slow, careful process, and the goal is to preserve what's left before it fades away entirely. But projects like this need time and funding, and both are in short supply. If you ever get a chance to see one of these carvings in person, it stays with you. You might be walking alone through thick woods, maybe just the sound of your boots on leaves. Then all of a sudden there's this wall of stone in front of you, and carved into it are symbols made by someone standing in that same spot centuries ago. No fences, no cameras, just you and that quiet connection through time. It's surreal, and it feels personal somehow. Today the gorge is known more for rock climbing and long weekends than ancient history. And that's okay, it's a beautiful place worth exploring. But deep in those woods is another story, an older one that barely gets mentioned. A language carved into stone that no one speaks anymore, but still lingers. If you go looking for these symbols, go with care. Don't touch, don't trace. Just stand there for a moment and look. Try to imagine the hands that made them. What were they trying to say? Was it a warning, a prayer, a celebration? We might never know, but the fact that we're still asking means they succeeded in one thing. They were heard, and after all this time, they're still speaking. The Kentucky Giant Skeletons. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, Kentucky newspapers were filled with strange headlines that today sound more like folklore than fact. Farmers digging wells, crews clearing land, explorers poking around old burial mounds. Again and again, the reports followed a familiar pattern. Someone would stumble onto a skeleton, but not just any skeleton, a giant. These bones, according to the articles, belonged to people who stood 7, 8, sometimes even 10 feet tall. The discoveries came from all over: Lexington, Louisville, Barberville, even remote hollers in the Appalachian foothills. The descriptions were always the same: long leg bones, skulls with odd shapes, burial mounds arranged in circular patterns, and often strange artifacts buried alongside copper tools, stone weapons, and what one paper called engraved tablets. Sometimes they mentioned even weirder details, like skulls with double rows of teeth, or bones so old and fragile they crumbled into dust the moment someone touched them. Now let's be honest, journalism in the 19th century had a flair for the dramatic. What we'd now call clickbait was just normal reporting back then. But these weren't just one-off stories. Dozens of similar accounts appeared over decades, not just in Kentucky, but across the Midwest and Appalachia, Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, Illinois, all places where ancient mound-building cultures once lived. So, what was really going on? The most grounded explanation is that people were simply misjudging what they found. The Adena culture, for example, thrived in this region over 2,000 years ago. They built mounds, buried their dead with care, and yes, some of them were taller than average for the time. Maybe 6 feet tall, maybe a little more. But even if you found someone that size, if you didn't know how to measure properly, or if the bones had shifted in the ground, it'd be easy to overestimate, especially if you wanted to believe you were holding the remains of a giant. And remember, this was long before modern forensic science. There were no calipers, no proper preservation techniques. Someone finds a femur longer than expected, and suddenly they're guessing the person had to be 8 or 9 feet tall. And once one town printed a headline like 10-foot skeleton found in barn, you can imagine the next town over wanting to top it. But not everyone chalked it up to exaggeration. In fact, some people believed the skeletons belonged to a completely different race of people, a lost civilization, taller, stronger, and somehow forgotten by mainstream history. That's where the legend of the Kentucky Giants really takes shape. By the early 1900s, the idea of ancient giants in America had taken hold in fringe archaeology circles. Writers began connecting the dots, pointing to mounds across the US, and claiming they were built not by Native Americans, but by a mysterious race of giants. Some even linked them to biblical stories, like the Nephilim. Others suggested they were survivors from Atlantis, or ancient Europeans who crossed the ocean long before Columbus. And in a lot of those stories, one name kept coming up: the Smithsonian. According to the legend, the Smithsonian Institution was sent many of these skeletons and then quietly made them disappear. Some say they were locked away in basements. Others believe they were destroyed entirely. The motive? To protect a version of history that didn't allow for ancient giants. Now let's pause here for a second. It's true that the Smithsonian collected thousands of skeletons in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Many of them came from mound sites in Kentucky and nearby states. And it's also true that anthropology back then was far from respectful. Native American burial grounds were looted, artifacts were scattered, and some remains were studied without consent. But the idea that the Smithsonian deliberately covered up the existence of giants, that's harder to prove. No verified 8 or 10-foot skeletons exist in their records. There are no credible scientific reports confirming such measurements. And yet, the stories continue. Why? Because people remember what they saw or think they did. In Kentucky, you'll still find families who say their grandfather helped dig up giant bones while working a field. Some claim the skeleton sat in a barn for years before someone from the government took it away. Whether those stories are exaggerated, misremembered, or real, they've stuck around. They've become part of the regional folklore. And it's not just the size of the bones that keeps people curious, it's where they were found. Most of the accounts link the discoveries to mound sites, those low, grassy hills that dot the landscape in places like Wycliffe or along the Ohio River. These mounds weren't just dirt piles. They were engineered, planned, and often aligned with the sun or stars. Some were used for burials, others for ceremonies, and we're still figuring out exactly how they were built and why. So when settlers came along in the 1800s and started leveling those mounds for farmland or digging into them out of curiosity, it's no surprise they found bones. The real question is whether those remains were truly outsized or simply misunderstood. Visiting the remaining mound sites today, it's hard to picture any of this. Most of the mounds have been flattened, subdivisions and highways have taken their place. A few protected spots remain, like the Wycliffe Mound site in western Kentucky or some of the earthworks near Ashland. But there's no mention of giants, no signs pointing to lost civilizations, just grassy humps in the ground, slowly blending back into the landscape. Still, if you stand near one of those mounds, especially in the early morning or just after rain, you might feel something, a kind of quiet pressure. Not spooky exactly, just old, like the land is holding on to something it's not ready to let go of. And maybe that's what draws people to these stories in the first place. Not just the mystery, but the sense that we've missed something. That beneath our feet is a version of history we've barely scratched the surface of. Whether that history includes giants is up for debate, but it definitely includes people with lives, beliefs, and traditions we still don't fully understand. At the end of the day, the story of the Kentucky giant skeletons might say more about us than it does about them. About how we react to the unknown, how we handle things that don't fit neatly into textbooks. There's something deeply human about wanting there to be more mystery, more wonder, more lost chapters waiting to be found. So next time you're walking through the woods in Kentucky or standing near an old mound, keep your eyes open, especially after a hard rain, when the ground shifts just enough to give something up. Maybe it's just a rock, maybe it's a fragment of the past, or maybe, just maybe, it's another piece of a story that still hasn't finished telling itself. Mammoth Cave Mysteries. Mammoth Cave isn't just big, it's the biggest, by far. With more than 400 miles of explored passageways and who knows how many miles still hidden beneath the surface, it's officially the longest known cave system on Earth. That fact alone makes it impressive. But it's what's inside, and what still hasn't been explained, that turns Mammoth Cave from a natural wonder into something stranger, something mysterious. Long before there were gift shops or guided tours, people were venturing deep into Mammoth Cave. And not just for fun. Some of the oldest artifacts ever found inside, woven sandals, torches made from river cane, simple stone tools, are over 4,000 years old. Think about that. Ancient people, with nothing but handmade lamps and gut instinct, went farther into the dark than most of us would ever dream of going. Not just a few feet past daylight, but miles into the black. What's weird is what they left behind, and what they didn't. Archaeologists have found all kinds of items inside the cave. Tools, torches, baskets, but no signs of permanent living. No cooking fires, no food scraps, no ash piles or sleeping areas. This wasn't a place where people stayed. It was a place they entered, did something specific, and then left. But what were they doing? One obvious guess is mining. Mammoth Cave is rich in minerals, especially saltpeter, which was used for preserving meat and making gunpowder. But that activity came much later. in the 1700s and 1800s. The early Native Americans who explored the cave were there thousands of years before saltpeter had any use. Some researchers believe they were collecting other minerals, like gypsum or epsomite, for ceremonial or medicinal purposes. But there's another idea, and it's harder to pin down, that the cave was a sacred place. In some Native American traditions, caves represent a kind of gateway, the entrance to the underworld, not a hellish place, but a realm of spirits, ancestors, or transformation. If that's true, then maybe the trips into the cave weren't about gathering anything physical. Maybe they were about ceremony, about ritual, about connecting with something beyond this world. One discovery in particular brings that theory into sharp focus. In the 1930s, deep in a dry tunnel far from any natural light, researchers found something unsettling: the preserved body of a Native American man. He had been crushed by a rockfall, maybe while digging or moving through the cave, and thanks to the cool, dry air, his body was mummified. Alongside him were tools, baskets, and other belongings, untouched for over 1,000 years. The discovery made national headlines, and for a while, in a decision that feels wrong in hindsight, his body was put on public display. He was treated as a curiosity, not a person. Eventually, he was reburied, but the question lingers: what was he doing down there so far from the surface? Was he part of a group, on a spiritual journey? Did he get lost? Or was he sent into the cave alone, on purpose, maybe as part of an initiation? We don't know, and honestly, we may never know. But the cave keeps asking. Even after Native Americans stopped using Mammoth Cave, the mystery didn't go away. In the 1800s, it became a tourist destination. Tour guides would lead candle-lit walks into the deep tunnels. Some were safe, others not so much. There were stories of visitors getting turned around in total darkness, of stepping too close to cliffs, or hearing echoes that didn't make sense, water dripping in strange rhythms, or voices in tunnels where no one else was. One of the most famous early guides was a man named Stephen Bishop. He was formerly enslaved, and he knew more about the cave than anyone else in his time. He was the one who gave names to many of the cave's sections, names that are still used today. But there's a legend about Stephen Bishop that's never gone away. It says he found a tunnel deeper than anyone had seen before, a place he never told anyone how to reach. According to the story, he warned others to stay away. No one knows if that's true, but it's a story people still tell, more than a century later. And then there's the modern stuff, the things that keep Mammoth Cave mysterious now. Cavers today are much more equipped than people were back then. They've got high-powered lights, maps, radios. But even now, experienced explorers report getting disoriented in mapped sections of the cave. Tunnels they've walked a dozen times suddenly feel unfamiliar. Turns they're sure weren't there before. Some chalk it up to fatigue. Others blame the weird acoustics or the sensory deprivation. But a few aren't so sure. Then there are the disappearance stories. People wandering off trail and vanishing for hours, even days. In almost all cases, they're eventually found, shaken, confused, but alive. Their stories often include strange details: flickering lights in the distance, footsteps behind them, the feeling of being watched. Classic cave horror stuff. Except they're not telling it like a ghost story. They're telling it like it happened. Paranormal investigators have taken notice too. They focus on areas like Corpse Rock, a part of the cave where the mummified remains were once displayed. Visitors there report cold spots, nausea, sudden chills, or that familiar sensation of being followed. Skeptics say it's just psychological, the mind playing tricks. Maybe, but once the cave gets in your head, it stays there. And the biggest mystery? It's that we still don't know how far Mammoth Cave actually goes. The 400 miles we've mapped, that's just the explored part. Every few years, someone pushes the boundary a little farther. They crawl into a tight crack, or dive through an underwater passage, and suddenly, another chamber opens up. Some areas are too unstable to explore. Others are off limits to protect wildlife or cultural remains. But they're out there, waiting. It's entirely possible that there are artifacts or even human remains still sitting in untouched parts of the cave, places no one's been in 1,000 years. And the longer they sit, the more the cave protects them. The dry air, the cool temperatures, the silence. It's like time slows down inside. Today, if you visit Mammoth Cave, it's a lot more comfortable than it used to be. There are paved walkways, handrails, electric lighting. Rangers lead tours. You won't get lost unless you're really trying. But even with all the modern safety, there's something about stepping into that cave that feels different. The air is cooler. The light disappears quickly. Sound behaves in strange ways. It echoes, it dampens, it surprises you. And somewhere in that silence, you feel it. The weight of history. the presence of something older, deeper, and harder to explain than what's on the tour guide's script. The National Park Service does its best to protect the cave, but it's a living, shifting thing. Sinkholes collapse, floods reroute the tunnels, rockfalls change the layout. Every so often, new cracks appear, and who knows what they'll lead to. Maybe just more limestone, maybe nothing, or maybe something that explains why ancient people kept coming back, even when it meant walking miles into the dark with nothing but a flickering torch and faith. Whatever they were looking for, it was worth it to them. The Lost Tribe of Big Bone Lick. Big Bone Lick might sound like a joke when you first hear it. Honestly, it gets a laugh from just about everyone who reads the name out loud. But behind that funny-sounding label is one of the most fascinating prehistoric sites in all of North America, and it's sitting quietly in northern Kentucky, tucked into the kind of park you'd drive by without thinking twice. On the surface, Big Bone Lick looks pretty simple. There are open fields, a few bubbling salt springs, and a small visitor center with mammoth statues out front. It doesn't scream mystery or ancient history, but the truth is, this patch of land has been drawing in giant creatures, curious explorers, and maybe even lost human cultures for thousands of years. And the ground beneath your feet, it's packed with stories we're still trying to understand. The name Big Bone Lick is exactly what it sounds like. The soil here is loaded with salt and minerals, which made it a natural hotspot for animals during the last ice age. For tens of thousands of years, herds of massive creatures came here to lick the salty earth and drink from the mineral-rich springs. But for some, the visit turned into a trap. The terrain around the springs was swampy and soft. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, and prehistoric bison would sometimes get stuck in the muck and never make it out. Their bodies piled up over generations, layer after layer. What was left behind was a fossil jackpot. By the time European settlers arrived in the 1700s, they were stunned to find enormous bones just lying out in the open, skulls the size of barrels, femurs longer than a man's leg. Some people thought they'd found dragons. Others believed they were the remains of a race of giants. It was so strange, so massive in scale, that even Thomas Jefferson took an interest. He sent teams to Big Bone Lick to collect samples, convinced that these bones might belong to animals still roaming the untamed American interior. Because of that, Big Bone Lick is often called the birthplace of American vertebrate paleontology. It's where the US first started taking fossil studies seriously. But the ancient animals were only part of the puzzle. Mixed in with the bones, early explorers started noticing something odd: signs of people, old stone tools, charred wood, fire pits buried beneath layers of fossil debris. Some accounts, especially from French explorers in the early 1700s, mention Native American guides talking about a lost tribe, a group of people who had once hunted the giant beasts at the lick and then vanished. Some versions of the story said they were wiped out by the animals themselves, trampled in a hunt gone wrong. Others claimed the land swallowed them whole, people, camp, and all. Now that kind of story raises questions. Were these real memories passed down through oral tradition, or were the early European settlers misinterpreting the symbolic language of native myth and legend? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. What we do know is that Big Bone Lick was considered a sacred place by many Native American groups. The Shawnee, the Cherokee, and others all came here, not just to hunt, but to visit the healing springs and honor the spirits of the animals. Some oral histories describe the site as a place where the earth remembers, where time feels thinner. So when people talked about a lost tribe, it may not have meant a literal disappearance. It could have been a poetic way of saying, their time ended here, their story faded into the earth. But the idea of a lost people stuck in the public imagination, and as the 1800s rolled on, the stories kept evolving. Newspapers started calling Big Bone Lick the final battleground of an ancient race. Some claimed human bones had been found alongside the mammoths, hinting at a prehistoric massacre. Others spun more dramatic tales: giant warriors cursed by the gods, whole cultures wiped out by a vengeful earth. There's no hard evidence for any of that, but once a story like that gets going, it's hard to slow it down. In the early 20th century, some fringe theories started connecting Big Bone Lick to larger, more mysterious ideas. Some suggested it was tied to the ancient mound builders, or even pre-human civilizations lost to time. A few went as far as claiming the site might have been a kind of prehistoric pilgrimage ground, maybe even a ritual site where people left offerings of bones in honor of the beasts. That last theory isn't completely outside the realm of possibility. Some archaeologists have noted strange patterns in how certain bones and tools were found together, suggesting they might have been placed intentionally. Still, most of the formal research at Big Bone Lick has focused on the animals. The fossils here have helped us build a clearer picture of life during the last ice age, what kinds of creatures roamed this part of the continent, how they lived, and maybe even how they died. The human side of the story, though, remains mostly untouched. Part of that is practical. Big Bone Lick is a protected park now, and some areas haven't been excavated in decades. There's also a deep respect for the possibility that the land might still be sacred. Digging too deep could disturb more than just artifacts. It could disturb the memory of something important, even if we don't fully understand what it is. If you visit today, it's a quiet place. You'll see families walking the trails, kids climbing on the replica mammoths, and picnic tables under shady trees. The salt springs still bubble quietly, their edges crusted in white. The whole place feels calm, peaceful, even, but there's something under that surface. You can feel it in the stillness, in the way the land dips and rises just slightly, like it's hiding old wounds. There's a small museum with some tools, bones, and maps, but the big stories, the ones about the lost tribe, the whispers of giants, the strange mix of myth and science, you don't see those on the signs. You have to dig for them. Ask a local, or better yet, sit for a while and listen. The past doesn't always speak loud. What's especially intriguing is that Big Bone Lick isn't alone. All over the country, we hear these same kinds of stories of people who came before, who vanished without a trace, leaving behind just enough to make us wonder. This site fits perfectly into that pattern. Ancient animals, scattered tools, unexplained silences. It's enough to make you question what we really know. In the end, maybe there was no lost tribe. Maybe it was just a few hunters who stopped here again and again, their fires buried under the same mud that swallowed the mammoths. Or maybe there's more, an entire chapter of human history still locked beneath the soil, waiting for someone with the right tools and the right questions to uncover it. Either way, Big Bone Lick is one of those places that leaves an impression, not because of what you see, but because of what you feel. On a cool evening, when the grass is swaying and the last bit of sun hits the hills just right, you might find yourself standing there, looking out at the springs, and imagining what this place looked like 12,000 years ago. The bones, the hunters, the stories that vanished like smoke. Something happened here. We just don't know what. The Hopkinsville Stone Circle. If you drive just a little ways outside Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and find yourself in the right patch of hills and forest, there's a local mystery waiting quietly in the woods. It's not a massive landmark or anything flashy. In fact, most folks around here have only heard whispers about it, something about a ring of old stones hidden in the trees. They call it the Hopkinsville Stone Circle. Now, when people hear Stone Circle, their minds usually go straight to something like Stonehenge. That's not what this is. There are no towering slabs or dramatic views of the horizon. Instead, this circle is modest. Weathered stones, each standing about 3 to 5 feet tall, form a rough ring out in the woods. And while it may not look like much at first glance, there's something about it that sticks with you, especially because no one really knows who built it, when, or why. What makes this site so strange is how little official attention it's gotten. It's never been fully mapped, excavated, or studied by archaeologists. Most of what we know comes from old stories, bits of regional folklore, and the occasional reference in farm diaries or newspaper letters. But despite the scattered sources, a few details stay consistent. The circle is made up of large upright stones, set firmly into the ground. It measures anywhere from 30 to 60 feet across, depending on who you ask, and for years it was mostly forgotten, swallowed up by brush, buried under soil and time. It wasn't until the 1930s that people really started talking about it again. A few local history buffs wrote letters to the paper, wondering aloud about its origins. Some believed it was built by Native Americans, maybe by the woodland or Mississippian cultures, who were known to build earthworks and ceremonial sites across the region. Others argued it didn't look like anything they'd seen from those cultures. Maybe early European settlers built it, they said, as a boundary marker or a simple gathering place. And then, of course, came the more fringe ideas, that the circle was far older than anyone thought, possibly built by people who arrived here before Columbus, maybe even long before. To be fair, there's no solid proof for any of these theories. No tools have been found, no carvings or artifacts, and since no formal dig has ever been done, everything we know is based on observation and speculation. Over the years, some of the stones may have been moved, whether by curious explorers, land development, or simple neglect. But even now, if you manage to find the place, enough stones remain to make out the full shape, and when you stand in the center of it, it doesn't feel random. It feels intentional, like someone meant it to be exactly this way. One of the more interesting local theories is that the stones line up with solar events. A few amateur astronomers who've studied the site say some of the gaps between the stones line up with sunrise and sunset during the spring and fall equinoxes. Others say the shadows the stones cast during certain times of the year fall in noticeable patterns. Could it have been some kind of calendar? An early observatory? It's hard to say. The tree line around the site has changed a lot over the last 100 years, and the area is pretty overgrown now, which makes any precise measurement tough. But the idea isn't far-fetched. Plenty of ancient cultures track time through the movement of the sun, including groups right here in North America. And then there's the energy. This part of the story depends on who you ask. Some people who visited the circle say they felt something strange, like a quiet hum in the air or a faint vibration under their feet. Not exactly scary, just different. A few have said their dogs refused to step inside the circle, or that the birds went oddly quiet while they were standing there. Skeptics say it's all in people's heads. Power of suggestion, a mix of quiet woods and a good story. But it's hard to ignore the fact that multiple people have come away from this place feeling the same eerie calm. Whether it's imagination or not, the feeling tends to linger. In the 1970s, a small group interested in what they called Earth mysteries visited the circle with dowsing rods. They believed the site sat on a ley line, one of those supposed energy paths that connect ancient sacred places across the globe. It's not exactly scientific, but the idea added to the circle's mystique. Since then, a whole variety of folks have made their way to the site: meditation groups, paranormal investigators, and people just looking for a quiet place to think. Some people even link the circle to Hopkinsville's most famous unexplained event, the 1955 Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter. That's the one where a family claimed to have fought off strange goblin-like creatures during an all-night ordeal. It's a UFO legend now, one that still draws curiosity seekers to the area. And while there's no direct connection, some locals have speculated that the same energy that attracted those visitors might have something to do with the stone circle too. It's a stretch, but in a town where the line between fact and folklore is already blurry, the idea doesn't seem that wild. Another theory, though less talked about, is that this circle wasn't an isolated structure. Some believe it was just one piece of a larger network, maybe a series of ceremonial or astronomical sites spread out across western Kentucky. In the 1990s, an amateur researcher tried to prove this by mapping similar stone arrangements and burial mounds in the region. He noticed that several of them formed a loose arc across the map. It never went anywhere beyond hand-drawn sketches and personal notes, but those sketches still float around among regional history buffs. As for the stones themselves, they're plain. No engravings, no symbols, nothing you can point to and say this was their purpose. Some believe they were just utilitarian, maybe for fencing or marking land. Others think any markings they may have once had have simply worn away. A few take it a step further and suggest they were never meant to be marked at all. Maybe the message was in the layout, the way the stones relate to one another, and to the landscape. Getting to the site today is tricky. It's on private land now, and the current owners aren't exactly welcoming of uninvited visitors. Over time, fences have gone up, old paths have faded, and nature has done its part to hide the trail. But that doesn't stop everyone. Some curious hikers stumble across it by accident. Others go looking for it on purpose, armed with vague directions and a lot of determination. What's left is more suggestion than certainty. A quiet circle of standing stones, mostly forgotten by the outside world, still standing in the Kentucky woods. There's no big sign, no visitor center, no plaque explaining its origin. And maybe that's what makes it special. It doesn't demand attention, it just waits for those willing to notice it. And whether it turns out to be something simple, a boundary marker, a leftover from early settlers, or just an odd geological feature, it still feels ancient. It still feels like a place made on purpose. In a time when most mysteries are solved with a quick internet search, this one holds its ground. Quiet, undecided, unfinished. Sometimes that's all a mystery needs to do, just exist, just wait. Indian Staircase. If you're ever deep in the Red River Gorge of eastern Kentucky, far past the campgrounds and marked trails, there's a place that'll stop you cold. You hike through thick forest, push past rhododendron thickets, and work your way up the sandstone ridges that dominate this wild, ancient landscape. Then out of nowhere, something catches your eye. It looks like a staircase, not a modern one, not made of wood or metal. This is a staircase cut straight into the rock itself. Locals call it the Indian Staircase. From a distance, it doesn't even look real. just a strange pattern of shallow steps etched into a stone bluff that rises steeply above the forest floor. But the closer you get, the more obvious it becomes. This wasn't made by nature. These steps were carved by human hands. They're narrow, uneven, and worn down by time. Some of them barely hold a boot. Others are so shallow, you have to flatten your foot sideways to get a grip. There's no handrail, no rope, and nothing to catch you if you fall. One bad move and you'll tumble into brush and rock 20 feet below. And yet, someone went to a lot of trouble to make this. The Indian staircase is one of the most quietly fascinating and least understood mysteries in all of Kentucky, and nobody really knows where it came from. The prevailing belief is that Native Americans carved it centuries ago, possibly long before European settlers ever arrived in the region. Some suggest it might be over 1,000 years old, but no one has pinned down a date. No one even knows which culture might have made it. It just exists, cut into the side of a sloping cliff, like a secret path to the sky. The odd part is, when you finally climb it, there's no ancient village waiting at the top, no burial site, no clear reason why someone would go to such lengths. What you do get is a long, flat ridge with one of the most spectacular panoramic views in the entire gorge. The wind's sharper up there. You can see hawks gliding below your feet, and scattered across the sandstone are faint carvings, petroglyphs, spirals, stick figures, strange symbols that might have meant something profound once. Maybe they still do. There's a certain silence at the top, not the kind that feels empty, but a stillness that feels watched, not in a spooky way, just quiet, like the place demands respect. Some archaeologists believe this wasn't just a shortcut up a ridge. They think the Indian staircase may have been part of a ceremonial path, something sacred. The climb is tough. It takes effort, concentration, and balance. That's led to the idea that it might have been a ritual ascent, maybe a rite of passage, something only certain people were allowed or expected to do. The kind of journey that meant something by the time you reached the top. Others think the spot was used to watch the sky. The ridgeline gives you an unobstructed view of the sunrise and sunset, especially during the solstices and equinoxes. That's led to speculation that the site had astronomical meaning, not necessarily in a scientific sense, but spiritual, a way of keeping time, a calendar carved into the movement of the sun. There are no solid answers, only questions, guesses, and theories. And then there are the outlier ideas. The kind you don't usually hear in museum exhibits, but you will around campfires and in late-night internet rabbit holes. Some say the staircase doesn't fit Native American design at all, that it might predate known tribes. Maybe it was carved by an older culture, or even people from across the ocean, part of a long-debated theory that explorers from Europe, Africa, or even the Mediterranean made it to North America before Columbus. These are fringe ideas, to be fair. There's no solid evidence linking the Indian staircase to Egypt or South America. But when people look at it, how deliberate it feels, how out of place it seems in Kentucky, they can't help but wonder. It just doesn't fit cleanly into any historical box. There's also a more practical explanation. It was a hunter's shortcut. The Red River Gorge is rich in game, deer, elk, wild turkey, and the idea is that early hunters might have used the staircase to quickly scale the ridge while tracking animals. But that theory feels a bit thin. Carving footholds into solid sandstone without metal tools just to save time? That's a lot of work. You don't do that unless the place matters. And clearly, it mattered. For anyone who's climbed it, there's a shared feeling like the staircase holds memory. Something about the angle of the stone, the silence in the trees, the way the wind cuts over the ridge. People describe a shift as they get close, like the forest goes quieter, like the trail is waiting. Once you're up top, looking out across the green ripples of the gorge, there's a real sense of time stretching out behind you. You're standing on stone that was carved long before you were born, maybe long before this country existed, and you realize how rare that is. There's no paved walkway, no fences, no markers, no cell signal, just you, the rock, and the wind. And that might be the most powerful part of the experience, how untouched it feels. There's no official trail sign pointing to the Indian staircase, no glossy brochure or welcome center. If you want to see it, you either have to already know it's there or go with someone who does. It's not something you stumble on by accident, and it's definitely not beginner-friendly. The climb is steep, slick in places, and unforgiving. It's claimed its share of twisted ankles and nervous hikers. Rescue teams have had to pull people out after wrong turns or falls. Rangers don't promote it, and they definitely don't recommend it for tourists without experience. But that isolation has also helped preserve it. There's something valuable about that, especially in a world that's so built up, So loud, so commercial. The staircase hasn't been turned into an attraction. It hasn't been turned into anything, it just is. And maybe that's why it sticks with people. It doesn't answer your questions, it gives you new ones. Who carved this? Why did they do it here? What did they see? Standing in this same spot, looking at the same horizon? We may never know. The markings are too faint to translate, the original builders long gone. But the stone is still here, the steps are still here. You can still climb them, still feel that strange mix of effort, fear, and awe. And when you reach the top, you might catch yourself looking around. Not for danger, but for presence, because you'll feel it, like the land remembers. Whatever the Indian staircase was, a ceremonial path, an ancient lookout, a mystery lost to time, it was built with care, carved with purpose. Someone wanted to go up that ridge badly enough to chisel their way into history, and now it waits for the next person willing to climb,